So thank you for joining us. This is our 2020 Distinguished Educator Symposium, and I'm going to open the floor to our president, Jg Harrington.
Hello, everyone. I have the happy task of welcoming you to the Distinguished Educator Symposium, the first event of our annual craft weekend. Symposium is near and dear to my heart because education and scholarship are central to our mission, and I'm looking forward to it. Before we start, I have a few thank yous. To Leila, Cartier, our moderator, and to each of our distinguished craft educators on the panel, but also to the chair of the craft weekend, Gwen and Jerry Paulson, and to Andrea Yurovich, who organized this year's symposium. In addition to the committee, I want to thank my predecessor, Michelle Manat. Michelle handed over the reins to me just a few weeks ago, so you can thank her not just for Craft Weekend in general, but for what had to be done to pivot from an in-person event in the spring to a virtual event in the fall. I'm incredibly appreciative of everything she's done to make it possible. And now, I get to hand this event over to her so she can introduce the program. Michelle?
Thank you, JG. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for that kind introduction and handover. Yes, I am Michelle Manat. I'm the immediate past president of the James Renwick Alliance, and I'm joining you from McLean, Virginia. It's delightful to have everyone here today, and we thank you for your understanding and your flexibility in the unique year that is 2020. So the James Renwick Alliance is a nonprofit organization founded in 1982 that advances, supports, and communicates to the American public what that is American craft art and craft artists. And we do that through public programs, through awards and recognition of excellence, and by providing financial resources to museums and institutions that are at the heart of craft in this country. Part, as I say, of our mission is honoring and awarding excellence in those who populate and enrich and move forward the craft art field. And thus, every other year, so in every even year, we choose and honor 4 distinguished educators who over the course of their career have had a major impact both within the institution or institutions that they teach in, as well as on the career and the trajectory of their students. We select these awardees based upon a nominations process that is open to all members of the James Renwick Alliance, and then is selected by a voting system. So it is an award that is given to the people who garner the most awards and the most votes among our population. And that process happened last fall. And we had in our hands and in our minds exactly who these awardees are as of last December. So here we are 10 months later, finally having the occasion to bring them to you and to include them in the pantheon of distinguished educators of the James Renwick Alliance. In order for us to have a great symposium this afternoon, that required finding a great moderator. And I'm so delighted and so thankful to Leila Cartier that she agreed to take on those duties for us today. Leila Cartier is the executive director of CraftNOW. It is an umbrella organization that unites and leads all of the leading institutions of artists in Philadelphia's remarkable and vibrant craft scene. Prior to leading CraftNOW, Leila was the curator of exhibitions at the William King Art Museum in Abington, Virginia. She has an MFA from the Art Institute of Chicago, and she is a working artist with her own studio in Philadelphia. Maybe she'll tell us a little bit about that later. May I introduce and may I welcome Leila Cartier.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I think it goes without saying that it is a great honor for me to be here, and even more rewarding, I have been able to use this opportunity to spend focused time with each of the awardees. I'd like to speak a moment about what brings me here. The organization CraftNOW Philadelphia was founded 6 years ago to unite, support, and promote the exceptional talent among us and the importance of craft to the widest possible audience. We do this work because it is our core belief that craft is a great unifier and convener. People from all walks of life, all ethnicities, age groups, neighborhoods, and all political viewpoints can and do make things. At CraftNOW, we work to demonstrate how makers and their supporting institutions are important for our community and they generate value. I'd like to mention CraftNOW's own symposium is coming up next week as part of our Craft Month activities in November. We are examining craft through the theme Cultures of Making, which was taken from our recent publication, Craft Capital, to highlight the many ways that research, activism, and connection are developing out of craft practices all over the country. Lastly, I'm going to mention and invite all of you to our live casual program that will be Saturday, November 14th. I know our past keynote speakers are going to be joining us, Glenn Adamson, Michelle Fisher, Roberto Lugo, and Abraham Thomas. They are helping me put together a fun evening to include some scholarly information as well as entertaining surprises. So with that, I believe we have all given our official remarks. Any latecomers have had their chance to sign on, and all of you have been able to settle in. I am excited to begin this afternoon's program. Today's award recipients will each present for about 20 minutes, and this will be followed by a panel discussion and the presentation of awards. Our awardees are eager to hear your questions in the audience, so please put them in the chat along with your name and where you are joining us from so that I may share them along with the few questions I have prepared. I'm going to introduce our first award recipient. Sandra Sherman is the head of the Jewelry and Metalwork program at San Diego State University in California. She received her diploma degree, or MFA, from the Academy of Fine Art in Munich, Germany, where she resided for 10 years. Sandra Sherman's work explores the distinctive voice of jewelry and the psychological and social context of the body wearer. She has been the recipient of many awards, including those from the Tiffany Foundation, Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, Mid-Atlantic Regional National Endowment for the Arts, as well as a Fulbright Scholarship for Study Abroad. She's exhibited and published in Europe and the US. Her work can be found in significant public collections, including the Museum of Art and Design, the Los Angeles County Museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Smithsonian American Art Museum, where she was part of the first Renwick Invitational 5 Women in Craft in 2000. Sondra, congratulations to you on this award, and thank you so much for starting this program by sharing your work with us today.
Thank you, Leila, and I'm honored and appreciative to the Renwick Alliance for this award. I'm going to start my presentation with my approach to jewelry as art, then followed by some information about the San Diego State program and alumni, and finish with images of a few series of my work. So in terms of my approach and continually seeking new challenges for myself, I've created seemingly disparate groups of work. And there are two questions which have consistently been part of my decision to follow a new inspiration. And the first question is, why is it jewelry? Why express myself in, and what meaning is inferred by the context of jewelry? Those are the body or wearer, but also the social and psychological functions of jewelry. I was living in Germany as I began to ask this question, and there was at that time, and still is, much jewelry, which in the vein of conceptual art, has jewelry as its subject or content. I decided that did not take the risk that I wanted to take, which was to make jewelry that, while self-reflective, was about what jewelry is about. I wanted it to stimulate thought about humanistic subjects inherent to the format and site of jewelry: social roles, personal identity, private and public experience, sentimental expressions, and our need to memorialize or commemorate. The second question is, why is it made by an individual in my time and place? How does it create a different experience than other forms of jewelry, than other artists' jewelry, and than other forms of art? Those questions inform my work as they inform my teaching. It has been my privilege to teach at a variety of programs before my current position at SDSU, where students are fortunate to work with many accomplished faculty. As we know, it takes a village. In the academic setting, we ask many questions that we attempt to answer with objects that generate meaningful conversations. The diversity of work produced in the program is evidence of the multiplicity of concerns that can be addressed within jewelry and metalwork, and our teaching philosophy, which supports the individual student's voice as opposed to a program identity. I firmly believe it is my responsibility to help student artists find their voice, not to amplify mine. The consistent character of work promoted in the program is sophisticated personal expression, finding integrity in the context and subjects of jewelry and metalwork, domestic or personal scale, the socio-political functions of decorative arts, conceptual design, and the languages of materials and skill. In this image, you see the team at work. The SDSU Jewelry and Metalwork Graduate Program was invited to present its interactive exhibition, AKA Wear It, at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art as part of a special reception celebrating Beyond Bling, the Lois Boardman collection. Visitors were invited to select a piece of jewelry and proceed to the step and repeat to have their portrait taken and posted to the ongoing exhibition on Instagram at AKA Wear It. On the left, you may see some faces you recognize in this group from the opening event. On the right, LACMA visitors of all persuasions were eager to model some art jewelry. In 2019, we were invited to present an exhibition at Gallery Marseille, which is a world-famous gallery in the field of art jewelry located in Nijmegen near Amsterdam, a city known for its contemporary design and architecture. Seven graduate students and 2 faculty traveled to install the exhibition. We thought we'd bring a little California to Amsterdam, and the exhibition was called Surf Report. It's my pleasure to share with you the work of some alumni. Dimitra Tamlaudis' work acts as a mobile vestige, rooted in place, personal narrative, and identity. She's fascinated by how our identity is bound to our surroundings and the way jewelry has the authority to capture and embody this link. Symbolically and physically, her work borrows visual and formal languages observed in architecture, landscapes, and sites with an intent to activate these characteristics as ornament to be worn on the body. By relating to the aesthetics of architecture, landscape, and place, Tamlaudis' work means to connect us intimately to the world. Dimitra has held various teaching positions at University of Texas, El Paso, Kent State University, Houston Community College. Originally from Philadelphia, she's currently living in Athens, Georgia, where she's assistant professor at University of Georgia in the Jewelry and Metals program. Alexandra Hopp's series, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, is a body of work that explores how obsessive compulsive disorder relates to herself, the culture at large, and especially its relationship to the identity and practices of the goldsmith. The habits of obsessive compulsive disorder and the practice of the goldsmith are strikingly similar. Both have lives marked by repetitive action, most often on a minuscule scale. Both seem to have a heightened awareness of minutiae. They're concerned with the seemingly minor details and that the normal observer would overlook. The only difference is that the former is characterized as a disorder, while the latter is seen as a certain temperament beneficial to the goldsmith. These works shown are Bibliomaniac's chain and 2 brooches. Bibliomania is a symptom of obsessive compulsive disorder, which involves the hoarding of books. Alexandra is an independent artist and educator living in Los Angeles, California. Michael Rubicki started the program making jewelry inspired by building construction systems and forms. And as he discovered his own questions, he finished the program making sculpture from the same inspiration with an attention to detail that only a jeweler would bring. Rubicki currently makes sculpture and furniture out of his San Marcos, California studio. An interest in craft and construction techniques runs through much of his work. Combinations of metalsmithing, woodworking, and industrial construction can be seen in his compositions that emphasize the richness and expressive merits within materials, inspired by the juncture of the natural and built environments. Current ideals of minimal intervention into the existing natural world when building the infrastructure needed to live inspires minimal compositions that embrace the raw results of fabrication processes. Melissa Selvius's work is inspired by the amulet, an object meant to be in direct contact with the skin or close to the body. It can be a lucky charm or used for protection against something unseen that may generate physical or mental harm. In contemporary culture, we still see many historic forms of amulet. The amulet's power is created through a placebo effect. It works because we believe in its power. The necklace format allows the amulets to be in close contact with the wearer. The series employs a range of scale. The larger pieces can be a visual distraction between the wearer and the viewer, offering protection by way of diversion. The smaller neck pieces can be hidden and more personal, not letting the outside world know that protection is needed. Melissa currently teaches at Cal State Fullerton in the Jewelry and Metals and Crafts program. Jessica Anderson's work addresses the affect of objects and defined notions of waste in relation to ideas of collection. Objects occupy and populate our lives. What denotes an emotional attachment to a thing? Can objects be used as acts of preservation, physical reminders of a person or place? Jessica is interested in the life of objects, principally those which have lost the personal interaction of their former function, but still contain the evidence of contact in its form, surface, and appearance. In her work, she attempts to showcase the form and effective appeal of objects in the construction and presentation of jewelry. She hopes to generate new interactions between the wearer and object and the viewer. Jessica's awards include artist residencies at the Craft Alliance in St. Louis, Missouri, and at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. Her work has been exhibited and published nationally and internationally. She's currently an independent artist and educator residing in San Diego. Kellyanne Temple is interested in our relationship with medical interventions. She's both fascinated by and fearful of the body's ability to adapt, accept, reject, and repair. She works in materials and forms that reframe her thoughts about the disparate connections between the organic and inorganic, living and non-living, human and machine. Microbial cellulose, a material used in medicine for wound care, is used to represent the human body. The process of growing, harvesting, and manipulating microbial cellulose allowed her to imagine herself in the operative role of a medical professional. Creating sensitive skin-like material takes on properties similar to leather. For this work, the microbial cellulose stands in for the body. Human skin is the comforting boundary between interior and exterior. By choosing to aestheticize the material with ornament, visual patterns, and textile techniques as a surface, she proposes acceptance and transformation as it captures intimate moments where the biological and the mechanical touch. Temple has exhibited her work nationally and internationally and is assistant professor of art at University of Central Oklahoma. Inspired by the sentimental joy found in artificial landscapes and kitsch, and in alliance with a wildly aestheticized millennial view of dreams and desires, Leslie Shershaw celebrates kitsch with the awareness that its sentimental nature will not sustain happiness. She finds solace in the artificial, pre-digested, imagineered, and the ornate, all conditions whose only objective is to be unapologetic distractor and bearer of joy. Kitsch experiences, such as floating in a lazy river, is a delightful path of least resistance, a sentimental self-help quick fix to briefly turn one's mood around. In these constructed worlds, one can be mesmerized by beautiful things without thought. The joy they bring is something that many of us long for these days. Don't think, just float into the insatiable void. Shershaw has lived all over the country and has held teaching positions at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, San Diego State, and most recently, New Mexico State University. Her awards include New York City Jewelry Week, One for the Future, Snag Educational Endowment, Haystack Open Studio Residency, and Huster Center for Contemporary Craft Residency. She's currently an independent artist and educator based in San Diego. Now I'm pleased to share some of my work, which responds to those same questions. I love words. Sometimes it's the sound, anthophobia. Sometimes it's all that it suggests when its meaning is explored, an abnormal and persistent fear of flowers. And best is both, anthophobia, an abnormal and persistent fear of flowers. Fear of flowers? Who's afraid of a flower? I hate pharmaceutical commercials. They make me nervous and then sell me something to ease my nerves. I like the idea of a medicinal corsage and jewelry that soothes. As an objective observation, these pieces consider the phenomena of the medicalization of society by relating an object significant of social conventions, the corsage, as adornment or jewelry, to a medicinal utility. The title, Anthophobia, Fear of Flowers, refers to an actual psychological condition which is hard to imagine. As a title for these pieces, it indicates a questioning view of the increasing need for medicinal treatments for aspects of diverse human sensibilities and of the social conditions which create so much anxiety. For the first exhibition of these pieces, I was fortunate to have a gallerist, Sienna Patty, who was game to amplify the experience through the presentation. I designed a display which reiterated the corsage references with an abundance of flowers reminiscent of the flower stall. It was interesting to observe the slight tension in the visitors as they navigated the border of flowers to look at the work. We created a lot of anthophobia with this display. The Rorschach Corsage series returned to the social identity and psychological states expressed through jewelry. In Anthophobia, the botanicals used to treat depression or social anxiety were allusions to the psychological state of the wearers, and the flower corsage referred to the role of adornment in portrayal of identity in social experience. The corsage silhouette has become a Rorschach test ink blot, which provides a field for the medicinal blossoms in the Rorschach Corsage series. These slides show the front and back of the piece. The forms are built in layers reflective of the mediation of social and psychological experience of the wearer. The elaborate backsides of the brooches are inspired by the emotional states we do not proclaim in public, while the front surface presents our orderly public persona. And as in life, they do not always stay in their socially prescribed location. Found Subjects is a series where each jewelry piece is inspired by a book. It surprises people to hear I have not read the books. I love words in literature. They have contributed to my work as inspiration or reference, present as the title of a series or individual piece. Somewhere along the line, perhaps it was The Last Move, Coast to Coast, Packing all those books again, something prompted the idea to allow the unread books to directly inspire a piece of jewelry and boast another life off the shelf. All jewelry becomes a form or element of portraiture, and in Found Subjects, the book and jewelry piece came to reflect the imaginary reader, author, or wearer. And what seemed like a good idea at the time turned into what was I thinking? I've continually followed curiosity and sought new challenges over multiple series of work. But responding to individual books of varied character in a form particular to each came to feel like slightly schizophrenic creative acrobatics. I could have made a series of work for each book. It is my nature to ponder and thinking, and I prefer to explore something I'm engaged by on multiple levels over a series of pieces. Intuition, interests, and experience inspire research, which folds back into new intuitions, taking material form. Perhaps starting as a painter left a mode of adding and subtracting, which is impractical to metalwork, or maybe because I'm a Libra or commitment phobic, I can't decide. However, in this series, the challenge was to express an instinctive perception of each book, reader, or author into material, form, and jewelry. Listen the Wind. That's such a dramatic title with its exclamation point and appeal to have the reader imagine the circumstances that would elicit such an expression. I loved the embossing of the airplane. It seems so technical in comparison to the title. This is one of my favorites of the series, perhaps for a similar sense of paradoxical character. Its scale, haptic experience, it's hollow and lighter than assumed, and very specific but light-handed reductive form seems so crucial. When worn, its presence fluctuates between toy, charm, and crucifix. It turns everyone who handles it into an 8-year-old, zoom, zoom, zoom. But as worn, its material and scale and quiet form make it a more poignant symbol. In exhibition, the books are presented on whitewashed plywood quasi-library lecterns tailored to their individual size and haphazardly arranged in the space. The presentation allows the pieces to borrow authority from each other and from the status of installation as a format. But it is endearing. It resembles a room full of people milling about. They're all wearing the same uniform on a variety of body types. Some are more matronly, some a bit frail, and others sturdily scientific. A sense of sociability develops, first suggested by the tables as figures, then a figure standing at the table, and ultimately that figure is you, surrounded by some quiet characters with whom you might have a conversation. Upside Down in Paradise is the current series exploring new lands. And new lands may be concept, materials, or process, and usually it's a mixture of all three. Bringing new challenges and unfamiliar language, it starts out awkward or banal and contributes a lot to my scrap box, which I like to think of as compost, rotting nutrients which will help more things to grow. In this case, I'm responding also literally to new lands as I physically bring the wearer into the mental space of SoCal as experienced by a relative newcomer. I've been collecting visual research for years, taking photographs and videos while traveling by car or train within Southern California. The viewpoint provided by traveling in climate-controlled spaces of cars or trains on the freeways or tracks as they transect the natural landscape became a resonant framing device. As a relatively new resident of California, coming from northeastern US urban environments, I can't help but reflect on the history and socio-cultural conditions evident in the urban roadside scenery, especially in relationship to the magnificent natural beauty. As an artist, I see the potential metaphor in everything. The vestigial glamour of the California idyll of the 1950s and 60s, palpable in their faded commercial signs and architectural facades which punctuate the roadside with their gemstone-like shapes and generous proportions against the expansive blue sky, inspired oversized jewelry with sun-weathered surfaces. The imagery is distorted and fragmented, reflecting the heightened awareness, continuous movement, and endless sky, sea, roadways, and dreams encountered when going to California in your mind. The landscapes show no consistent relationship to the horizon or gravity, amplifying the surreal sense of detachment that car culture provides. At times, the freeway is a sea of cars. Green interstate signs are floating clouds, and the freeway flyover brings the sense of a passing ship. The necklaces translate those sensations as the passenger becomes the wearer, surrounded by the landscape with a disorienting view. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. It is clear your influence as an educator and professional artist really draws out excellence in your students. I believe everyone that just saw that presentation will agree that this was evident not only in technique, but in the strong and diverse conceptual approaches we saw in all of the work you were sharing. Thank you so much. I want to remind everyone in the audience to please share your questions for the awardees in the chat box. And while you're doing so, include where you are joining us from, since this virtual platform allows us to come together in a way that we wouldn't have been able to with an in-person event. Our next speaker is one of Philadelphia's own. To quote Sid Carpenter, "Working as an artist has been the source of all that has been meaningful and a source of joy in my life. Art is my common ground around which revolves my interaction with family, teaching, and community. I don't believe artists make the decision to become artists. They are born. The hope is that they find the will to pursue their vision, an environment in which to develop, and a culture respectful of their contributions." Carpenter is professor of studio art at Swarthmore College. She earned her BFA and MFA from Temple University's Tyler School of Art. Her work is in the permanent collection of the Renwick Gallery, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, James A. Michener Museum of Art, as well as numerous other public and private collections. She has received awards from the Pew Fellowship in the Arts, National Endowment for the Arts, and the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. Sid, congratulations to you. Thank you for joining us here today. And how is the weather over on your side of town?
Hi, Leila. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I want to thank all of those who are in the audience for coming to this event. It's been a surprise to actually receive this and an honor to receive this. So I just want to let you know how special a day it is, even though we don't get to be together to do this and to celebrate each other in person. This is actually a celebratory day for me. So what I wanted to do is just to begin with my teaching, because this is what I was awarded for, is as an artist and a teacher. And my teacher was Rudolf Staffel. I learned from him, the less said, the better. And I don't always follow that model, but I try to restrain myself rather than restrain the students. I try to keep it as open as possible and allow them to fill in the blanks, create fertile voids for them to fill. I provide options, anticipating the moment when they realize what's needed. This is a piece of Rudy's. It is one of his light gatherers. And it has, that series of work that he did has just been so inspirational and so, let's say, influential, if you will. So this is just one of those gorgeous pieces that I, as a student, observed when I was his student back at Temple University. So these are my students. The students are working. while they're working, you can go back because I haven't gotten to that one. While they're working, I'm asking questions, making references, readjusting their hand on a tool, waiting for them to see what they're doing, and then reassuring them that they can go after it. That's important to instill in them some sense of confidence. I tell them it's okay to risk making something ugly. Once they're willing to take the risk, I show them how to go after it. But they have to decide. They have to decide, not me. The best result is when they are surprised. It is more than they imagine they could do. There can be casualties, things happen. And of course, the technical or aesthetic casualties, but they're the glorious kind. I give credit to glorious failures. Discussion and critique is a significant part of my teaching. I want them to take away an awareness of how critical craft is to their quality of life, from the spaces they occupy to what they choose to consume. Their earliest attempts at making gives them access to a worldwide conversation, a different lens through which they can see and make connections, because that's important, is making connections from one area of their lives to another, from one relationship to another. They learn how to see an object, and they observe what's being made and how it's being made, and also by whom, who's making it. My best teaching moments have come when I present surprising information. You want to keep them off balance a little bit. A revelation. So it was when I showed my class these Benin bronze heads. These are from West Africa. There were audible gasps of surprise. They were accustomed to thinking about sub-Saharan art as what they would refer to as primitive. The fact that these technically sophisticated, elegant heads were produced by Africans before European contact was a revelation. So that I utilized that whole idea of surprise to keep them curious and also to stimulate their ability, or at least their motivation to research. I don't know which of them will continue as makers. You never know who's in the room, but they all will be affected by their experience as both viewers and as consumers. And it's something they can pay forward. Makers will need to observe and sustain a balance realized through the quality and quantity of what they produce. So I want to present a project that we did. I teach a class called Container as Architecture. And in that class, we think about the criteria, or at least the form of an object as it relates to larger architectural projects. And so for this project, I invited Massey Burke back to Swarthmore. She was a former student who now runs a company doing natural building techniques. And she was able to work with the students to create a large adobe structure. We started out by creating some ideas, possibilities of what this thing would look like. And it was also important for us to source most of the materials from the actual site, from the Swarthmore campus. She took us through just building a foundation, through mixing the adobe itself, coming from the mud that was, the clay that was unearthed during a building project that was going on. They were building a new, I think it was some kind of gymnasium, and unearthed this beautiful streak of clay, and we were able to use it as part of our building. And we began to build, and it attracted students from all across the campus, including students from other institutions in the area. And building involved students all over the campus, as I was saying, and just learning to build a structure, learning to think about design, and then ultimately getting this beautiful structure that was on the campus for about 5 years before it itself had to be removed and replaced by another structure. So these are some of the projects that have been produced in that class. Most of these students are beginning students who have not touched clay before. So in my own studio, I rely on history and gardening. Those are my two sources for making things. And the historical aspect combines natural history and family history. And I can bring all that home to this person who is my granny. I call her my granny. This is Indiana Hudson. And Indiana Hudson gardened in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, back during the World War II. She had a victory garden. And I went back a few years ago to find her garden and located it. And it was formerly located at a busy intersection overlooking the Monongahela River. And I was so gratified to notice that it was still a garden. It was still a park. It was still growing things. So what she would have seen when she was working on that hillside was what you see down below in that last slide. So Indiana basically is my hero, if you will. She was the person who I first became aware of as someone in my family who gardened intensely, which is what I do. And her daughter, which is my mother, Ernestine Hudson, also gardened. And the picture shows 2 trees that she planted when I was a teenager. And they were little sticks that she got in the mail. And this house is not really that far from where I live now. And I've been able to observe its growth. And these 2 mammoth trees always are evocative of my mother and her gardening practice. And this is my garden. I don't grow food. It's an ornamental garden. And it's a place that I see as a second studio for me. It gives me an opportunity to work with texture, form, color. I can move it around, change things. So it's a place that's just a restorative resource, as well as a place to just take chances with the plant forms. They survive, they don't survive. I create a harmonious environment that's visually stimulating, and of course, just kind of a resource for me and a sanctuary for me, and also for my neighbors. I always think about, I get such a large audience from this garden, almost as much, if not more, than something that I would get if I had a one-person show in a gallery. So knowing I was a descendant of 2 skilled gardeners led me to research just who was making art that made gardens that looked like me. I had always been making things prior to the series that I'll be showing you that reference the garden. So this slide is illustrating a series that I did on leaves, and thinking about the leaf and realizing the leaf is this flat, almost no dimensional object. I mean, it's very ephemeral. It's paper thin, if not even thinner. It's translucent often. So that delicacy is something that I associate with the leaf. But what would happen if I imagined it expanded? What if it was suddenly blown up with volume? And these are the pieces that came out of it. These are pieces that are about 24 inches high, so there's some mass to them. And so these leaves that are so delicate suddenly become bestial in their appearance. They have shoulders, they have bellies, they have breasts, all of these things. They move around, they challenge you. So the physicality of these, the idea of taking an object that you associate with a kind of delicacy, but change, these evolved into these kind of animal beast-like forms. And so this continued that association with the garden, making forms that reference the garden, but also have other meanings to them. I always have been working, or at least in this series, with forms that were about or approximately my own size. So these are about 5 feet in length. And I also, an important part of my work was to think about movement. It had to do with this idea that clay itself tends to be seen as kind of static it's heavy, it's weighted, and there's always the challenge to try to create a balance, or at least some stability. You want, flat bottoms seem to be the most typical solution for how a mass of clay could relate to its surface. But I was always interested in challenging that. And I did that in the leaf series and also in these pieces that look more like branches and twigs. But things begin to change, and I'm looking once again at how I can represent my history, my family's history in gardening. And I came across this book by a professor from the University of South Carolina, Richard Westmacott. And he did this anthropological study on African-American gardens and yards in the rural South, in which he looked at about 42 individual gardens or farms. And he did these very, very intricate, very detailed graphic maps. So you can see on the right, there's one of Westmacott's maps, and in it you can see he's found certain kind of graphic markings that would illustrate a plowed field, represent a structure. The discs represent the trees from seen above. There's all this kind of scaled information. And so this was kind of intriguing to me because he was trying to get a sense of what were there any kind of African retentions that showed up in these farms and gardens? What were the similarities? Just what were the distinctive things that were going on each plot? And my response was the one on the left here. And this is, let's see, Ellis and Anna Mae Thomas. Now I'm giving those titles to them because all of these pieces, because it's important for me to identify who these farmers are, who these gardeners are, many of whom have stayed on their land for multiple generations, through Jim Crow, through all of the obstacles that were thrown in front of them so that they could be removed from their land. A lot, or many owners of land in the South, African-American owners, farmers, left to relieve themselves of the indignities of Jim Crow and all of the things that were happening at that time, the government opposition and undermining of their ability to stay on the land. So when I come across a farm or garden that has been sustained in a family for multiple generations, I think these people are really amazing. This is a story about heroism and just courage, if you will. So it's important for me to name the names. So every sculpture that I have made about these farms and gardens is named for the family that owns that land. So this is Ellis and Anna Mae Thomas. The next is Buddy and Rosina Burgess. Willie and Jelena Gray. Inez Faust. Percy Robinson. Mary Lou Furcron. And this is the piece that's in the collection of the Renwick. So it also became important for me to locate myself in these spaces. I had been inspired by the Westmacott book and was using those maps to create objects. And after a few years of making these pieces, I realized I had to go to the farms. It was a no-brainer. I had to do this. So I came across an organization called the Southern African American Organic Farmers Network. And they were able to provide me with a list of farms that I could visit in the South. So a friend of mine, who you can see on the left, we decided that we would drive through the South and visit these farms. And the first farm that we visited was Troy Johnson. And Troy Johnson was in Monticello, Georgia. And I was able to take photographs, conduct interviews, make a short video on that trip. And my goal was to find the idiosyncrasies of each farm, because all of this work, they are portraits. They are portraits of places as well as of the people, without actually representing the physical nature of the people themselves. I wasn't making faces and bodies. So this is a detail of some of the things that I saw on Troy's farm, and it included kind of ramshackle fences. That crane that you're seeing was an artificial crane that he had put into one of his artificial water features. He was often using the interiors of old washing machines and different kinds of appliances in his garden. So he had this very distinctive appearance and feeling. That was something that I wanted to bring out in all the pieces. And this is Mary Howard, also in Monticello, Georgia. And what I saw in her property was this glider, this metal glider. Now, once again, these pieces are about a little under 5 feet, sometimes 5 feet. So they actually are taking on that same kind of physical presence that I've always needed in this work, is to kind of take on the sense of a body itself. So in that garden, I saw the glider. I saw the antique kitchen utensils. She was a canner, so I saw the jars that were filled with vegetables that she canned, and of course, always a fence. This is Sarah Reynolds, who was one of the farmers that we met when we traveled on the Gullah Islands. The Gullah Islands is especially interesting as a geographical location because it was that was primarily occupied and inhabited by slaves, but there was a very limited presence of whites at the time of slavery. So they were able to retain and maintain their language and their traditional practices, even in slavery. So this was one of the farms. This is Helen and Joseph Fields, also organic farmers. And I should say that the configuration of all of these is to represent a plant itself. So the bases, which elaborate on the actual narrative of who these places and people are, they represent the roots. Then as you move upward, it's a stem, and then the actual top of it is the flower. And when all of this is put together, it's a garden. This is Pearl Fryer. Pearl Fryer is kind of a rock star of the topiary world. And so this piece that I did of his represents the clippers that he used to shape the topiary. The numbers and all the other shapes on top are forms that he cut into, that he derived from different plants that he was able to retrieve from dumpsters, from the different garden centers, and be able to resuscitate them. And he has created a garden that is kind of world famous now. There's a film about him called A Man Named Pearl, and I highly recommend it. It's fascinating. And this guy is not only a metal sculptor, but he does sculpture in plants. This is Albert and Albert Howard, and they are twins. One spells his name with an A, the other one spells his name with an E. So Albert and Albert are farming in Monticello, Georgia as well. They're cattle ranchers. I think the next slide might show a different view of this. Yeah, they're cattle ranchers, and you can see the cow, their shed. And so I position them, the support for the clay are two wheels running down a rutted road. And that's what I felt about Albert and Albert, is that here were these two men, twins, joined at not only the name, but as you know, just these brothers who built this amazing complex of agriculture and a ranch as well. This is Rashid Nori, who is in Atlanta, Georgia, and he has created a series of farms in Atlanta called Living Well Farms, all to address food deserts in the Atlanta area. And the church building, the architecture that you're seeing on the left of this piece, is Martin Luther King's Ebenezer Church, which was right across the street from his garden. And then there's that ubiquitous plastic chair that we often see in gardens. But what was interesting about this place was that it was on the site of an apartment building that had been destroyed, but they didn't clear the site completely. So they left stairways and paths. And so when you walk through the garden, you can be walking on a path or up a pair of stairs that lead to nowhere. And he did a lot of planting in raised beds. This is Freewood's Farm, which is one of the first cooperative farms, and it is in South Carolina as well. And it is one of the cooperative farms that gave African Americans who had just been emancipated a place to farm, because that's what we knew how to do. The rifle itself was something that I saw on the farm, because they were in hostile territory. They were not welcome there, even though they cleared the land and they were productive in what they were doing. There was always a threat. So I did see this gun inside one of the houses, and you can see the buildings that I could observe. This farm was also unique because it was pre-industrial and continues to be. There are no motorized tools of any kind on the farm. It's all done with animals and people power. So back to my mom, and this is the last series. I've started a series that I call Mother Pins. And this is an outcome or an outcropping of the work that I was doing with the farms. And I was looking at some of the details, and the clothespin came up. And this clothespin I've used to represent my mother, because I still have her clothespin bag that she hung my clothes out as a child. And so I've done this series showing her in these different guises, because I think that the clothespin, when you look at it, looks like a female form, at least these antique ones. There's almost a kind of cycladic feeling about them, and a goddess feeling about them. So I've done these different iterations of my mother as a clothespin. Thank you.
Thank you, Sid. That was really remarkable. I am so fascinated you were able to study with Rudy Stoffel, and I really appreciated what you said near the beginning about how craft can be critical to a good quality of life, whether or not your students become artists themselves. And so interesting to hear more about the connection of two things that you love, which are gardening and making things with clay. And then you further intersect those with your love of research and the inclusion of your personal history and African American history. Thank you so much for that presentation.
Thank you.
Our next presenter and awardee is Warren Seelig. Selig lives and works in Rockland, Maine. He holds the rank of Distinguished Visiting Professor in the Craft and Materials Studies program at the University of the Arts here in Philadelphia, where he teaches, curates, and writes on various subjects related to art and craft. I say here in Philadelphia because that's where I am. He has lectured extensively for programs at the Gerrit Rietveld Academy, Amsterdam, the Royal College of Art in London, and at the National University of the Arts in Seoul. Warren has been a regular visiting critic at the Rhode Island School of Design and is a mentor in the graduate program at Maine College of Art. He has received numerous individual fellowships from the National Endowment, Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, and most recently from the Barr Foundation of the United States Artists. He has served on the boards of both Haystack and the American Craft Council, where he was also elected as a fellow. Warren, congratulations to you on this honor, and we are looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you, Leila. Can you all hear me? First of all, this is an incredible honor for me, and it just reflects the privilege that I've had working with students for nearly 40 years now, which overwhelms me. I can't believe it's been that long, but it has. And I'm going to be talking about some of my students, but I wish I could talk about so many more that have done such amazing things. But let me begin with talking about my own background and what influenced me, and then I'll go on to other things. But my father was a Rube Goldberg inventor, and he had many patents on all different kinds of machines involved in the textile industry, as did my grandfather and my great-grandfather. As a kid, I moved around textile mills with him and was absolutely fascinated by what I saw. I'm talking about when I was 8, 10 years old at the beginning, and I spent time looking at these things, but also seeing them as sculptures, seeing them as kinetic, as having energy, as being alive, as something that my father was working with and when he was inventing, but also something that fascinated me in some way, thinking that I might be something that I moved towards. This is a carding machine, for example, and these things to watch. It's unfair to see these things static, because when they're moving, there's life and there's energy there, and that's something that I was absolutely astounded by when I was a kid. Go ahead. This is a drawing, a patent drawing. My father had all kinds of drawings, not CAD drawings, but they were drawings with ink, pen and ink. And this, for example, is for a creel, for a power loom. But I saw this as an abstract object. I wasn't so much concerned about what it was as to how it looked. I tried to make these. I made these drawings myself. I emulated him, and I was fascinated by these things. Go ahead. When I was looking around at schools, I have a checkered history of going to a number of different colleges before I finally focused on the Philadelphia College of Textiles and Science. I walked into that school. This is what I saw. And it seemed, and I also looked at art schools. I knew it would be art in some way, and I stayed away from textiles because my family had been involved, but suddenly walked into this, saw these jacquard looms. Go ahead. And this image in particular, I think, seduced me to thinking about textiles as a way of working. This is an aspect or a part of a power loom. It's a tie-up for jacquard, but I saw it as an incredible volume, sculptural volume that has inspired me then and still gives me chills now. By the way, Lenora Tawney, if you know who she is, a really important figure in this field. She was inspired also by these exact looms which I worked on, which I got to know through working with her when I've written about her work. But these are early weavings. The Philadelphia College of Textiles is more of a trade school. I needed the opposite experience of what that place is about, so I went off to Cranbrook, which is more of a think tank, and spent time there. The earliest works were these kind of three-dimensional weavings, the architectonic weavings. Ty Smith, a scholar, Bauhaus scholar, just wrote about these things recently, which is kind of amazing since they happened over 30 years ago. But so I spent a lot of my early time weaving. This is a flat woven, folded various compositions that I worked with in the mid 80s, later 80s, and then went off to next. Was offered a residency at the Fabric Workshop in Philadelphia, which is an amazing place to work. When I first got there in the early 80s, they asked me to come and work, and I started working with these what I call spoken axle forms, which are made with and happen through the same impulse that happens when I'm making the more literal woven textiles, for example. But these are spoken axle pieces, Tyvek. Fabric, skin, but also real play with light and shadow, which has been a really important part of my work throughout my entire career. These things, by the way, fold up into batwing-like kind of forms. I went on with more forms related to this. Go ahead. I work with my wife on occasion, Sherry Gibson, and she has with her background architecture. We oftentimes do public commissions together, and she cites the work beautifully. This is I worked at University of Kentucky at Lexington, and this happens to be on a ship. It's an 80-foot spiral formed with a shadow field projected in the background. But I build a lot of pieces in Seattle, very large pieces in Seattle, but the smaller pieces like this 16-foot sculpture was built for Novartis, which is a Swiss pharmaceutical company. I built this for their company in New York City. I'm jumping around and I'm coming forward very quickly. I do installations in different places. This is an invitation to do a site-specific piece at the Farnsworth Museum in Maine. It's a 28-foot, in a 28-foot rotunda of hundreds of monofilament threads where light comes in from the clear story windows up above and projects onto a skin surface. Which creates a kind of moire, and the piece changes in terms of the way the light projects onto the surface from morning till night. Haystack has been a really important place in my life, and in fact, in my shadow field pieces, I began working with these probably 15 years ago or more. Time goes by so quickly I can't really tell. But these are stone shadow field pieces. In fact, I call them shadow field stone carpets. What's so provocative for me is the way that they project, where the shadow becomes as important as the object that's projected. So in a way, looking at these pieces, you can barely tell what is real and what is not, what is object and what is shadow. So shadow and light's a really important part. This is where I'm using materials, a crystal material here to create another shadow field where, again, the shadow becomes more important than the actual object. But these are fields, these are textiles. It's often, sometimes the craft becomes, people who involve in craft have a hard time seeing that, but that's not my problem. Next. More recently, these things have happened, the more color, shadow field colored light pieces have occurred, and in fact, I have an exhibition up right now where I'm showing a number of these shadow field pieces, including this piece, which is a suspended cluster, where it suspends out in space, and light projects through the color disc onto the wall behind. Good. I want to talk about for a minute about some collaborations that I've done. This one in particular is important. I've done a number of collaborations with students at Haystack, through Maine College of Art, at Portland Museum of Art. This one was done at the Brown Center at Maryland, at MICA in Baltimore. And it's a piece I work with students where we call drawing writ large. I was teaching an interdisciplinary course called Drawing Through Process, where we think of line as something physical rather than traditional line through pencil or brush. It's how we decided to use bubble tea sipping straws is a long story, but we used about 7,000 of them. The great thing about this project was all the students were involved in deciding on what it would be, but then all of them were involved in making parts that were later clustered and put together to create the larger form. It was a crapshoot, I'd say, as far as whether something would really come out of it, but it did. This is the fact they grew, excuse the term, but they grew kind of like a virus in the studios where we were building them at MICA and the station, the studios there, and then they accumulated out in the hallways, and then we took those things and loaded them onto the vans that Maryland had at MICA, and then ran them over to the Brown Center towards the end of the course, because the whole beginning of the course was students making their own individual works, and this is the collaborative thing that happened at the end. I love this image more because it shows the structural integrity of the object itself, very Bucky Fuller kind of triaxial image, but like also it's a great neck piece for those jewelers of the world out there. But we moved this work into the Brown Center, laid it out on the floor, knew the volume of elements we needed, composed the things, and then began to raise all these parts up into space to create this sort of floated drawing, and so we thought of as being floated drawing in space. Bubble tea sipping straws being translucent, lightweight, so nothing would fall out of the sky and hurt anybody in case that would happen. But this is it being moving up into space, and then finally continue. This is a kind of volume that was created, this kind of almost cloud-like kind of form that was created. But the actual process was an amazing experience, I think, for all of us, and I love working with students and thinking through projects like this with them. I've got 5 former students here. There's so many more that I'm not showing, but that's, I'm sure all of us have that same problem, I think. But these are students who've won awards and have done all kinds of things out there in the world. And I'll talk a little bit about their work with the time that was available. Claudia Crisan is a student who came from Romania to University of the Arts. She focused on fiber textiles and then also metals. From there, she went to Royal College of Art, which is actually where this piece. Would you go back to the previous slide first? Yeah, this is a waxen form. What Claudia has spent time earlier, a lot of her earlier work was making things in response to some important event in her life. This is a shoulder piece that she made of wax that was made in celebration of her own wedding to a musician from University of the Arts. Next. This is an exhibition that happened at Royal College of Art, where she, in a piece she called Taste Me, which undergoes a metaphoric process where the public is invited to consume the jewelry while being made, making them part of the creative process, and then the piece afterwards is left to melt into a puddle during the duration of the exhibition. Next. This is her work is more consumable now, consumable Cartier, and she's been working with a number of artists in collaboration, making these kinds of wearables that have a specific lifespan. This is a part of a performance piece. This is all spun sugar that she used to make these things. So these have, again, a limited lifespan, and they become part of a performance. And then, which I would love to show, but don't have time here. This is a way she's been working for a long time. This is a neck piece on Claudia, which is again also made of spun sugar. Piper Shepherd. Piper Shepherd has been working for a number of years. She's been co-chairing with Susie Brandt as the head of the fiber and textile program at Maryland, at MICA in Baltimore. She creates these gesso impregnated canvases that she then graphites black and then hand cuts to make a variety of forms. This one in particular, for example, or a number of them. I mean, one thing about Piper from the beginning at the University, actually Philadelphia College of Art, which is where she was when she was in school with us before it became University of the Arts, but she has an amazing ability to slow down, amazing ability to kind of to bring sculpture and textile into play. And I mean, these hand-cut lattices are something that are mind-boggling as far as just the production of these things, but then she with layering and even with the method of suspending these things, they emerge and have an incredible sort of sculptural presence. She also talks about these as a kind of drawing where she's cutting through that ground, that impregnated fabric, allowing light to come through, and that light becomes part of this drawing. Go ahead. This is the piece she did at Birmingham Museum in the United Kingdom, where a beautiful job of involving architecture of the space and also creating a sculptural plane that you can see through. She's had that ability to do that and has done that in a number of places. Okay. Detail of the hand cut work that happened. These are several other images of work, 10, 15 feet wide that she's been working on over time. Again, those turnbuckles and the actual, even the method of presenting these things makes these convincing as sculpture and gives them a kind of sculptural presence. It's quite beautiful. Seth Winter, here's Seth giving a TED talk recently. You never know what a student's going to do once they leave this. And one thing about Seth, when he was with us, he fell in love with woven structures, with weaving. And I'll say that in our program, we teach fabric structure in a way that it becomes a language, a learned language. It's not a group of recipes that one just pulls out of a hat and makes something from. And Seth did that so beautifully over time that probably one of the most inventive weavers, and also mesmerized and obsessed with weaving, I think, from the sophomore through senior year. went off to Cranbrook, and then did fabric design for a number of years, but then started to connect with a number of companies that were involved in medical textiles. And his knowledge of woven structures allowed him to design three-dimensional weavings that were used in all kinds of ways for vascular grafts. This is the right showing a notation for a trachea, which is on the left, which he's worked. This is the actual trachea, how it appears once it's woven. But he's worked with a team of doctors and engineers, and then there is Seth, who came from an art school, which I think is amazing that one would have that kind of background. But art school is a place where you work with problems and these problems solve, and this is the kind of thing that Seth did. Go ahead. These are just images that Seth sent to me. I'm not even sure exactly what they are, frankly, but that's okay. Next. This, he's also working a lot more recently with textile scaffolding, which is this is a knitted structure, which is used for cellular regeneration. This is obviously a stomach. And he designs these things. By the way, at the time he gave the TED Talk, he got his first patent for one of these things, for one of these devices that is used in the medical industry. So yeah. Make Young Lee. Make Young Lee. I think when I think about her, I think about hold there for a minute. Make Young Lee came to us from Dongga University in Busan in South Korea. She decided to move away from Korea and find a place where she could, where maybe the program was a little bit less traditional. She loved the program there, but we had another approach. I think of Make Young as, her work really connecting with the kind of spiritual and meditative possibilities that happen within textiles. And I mean, textile is this mark-making, repetitive. I think of a weaving as a drawing of both vertical and horizontal threads. Make Young came in and basically, although I teach the techniques of textiles, but also I encourage students then to kind of move off and meander and move into their own kind of territory. This is a more recent kind of sculpture she made using the ubiquitous twist tie. And she made this large kind of almost grotesque root that pushes up against the wall. Reminds me a lot of Eastern European tapestries that happen, only in this case, a lot more lighter in weight and a whole different sensibility, but still has a strong sculptural presence. Good. She also works with students in developing stage sets. In fact, she works with an opera company in Philadelphia that does most of their operas in Italy, and the students will work on developing these stage sets and then travel to Italy and present these things there. Good. This is a recent piece that she had at the Philadelphia International Airport. It's a 40-foot field called Yellow Forest that she is also that twist ties. It all involves that kind of the kind of spiritual and meditative practice that so often comes through those involving textiles. I think the act of twisting, piercing, wrapping, knotting, knitting, and this whole amalgamation of mind and body and soul, her services grow through connection, attachment, accumulation of related elements. Analogous, and now I often think of it analogous as to the way cellular accretion occurs in plants and animals, but her process explores the potential for a surface to grow through obsessive repeats. This is another one of her blossoms of twist ties. Also some sculptural forms, again, the most ordinary kinds of materials, pipe cleaners on the left as a kind of suspended sculpture, and then the twist ties on these suspended sculptures on the right. Smiling Susie Brandt. This is Susie Brandt, who's often on chair of the textile and fiber material studies program at MICA. When I think about Susie, also what's written about her, she recast lost and found material cultures into textile objects, performances, and installations. She's also a thrift shop store junkie. She harvests fabrics from thrift stores, oftentimes wool garments and things, strips them up, creates these sushi-like kind of quilts. I think she's one of the more brilliant quilt makers around because of the way she makes the quilts, and because also they have a twist to them. They're never quite just about quilts; they're about something else. And they oftentimes they have a strong. They're in response to the place where they're made. This is one of her stump rugs. She spent a lot. Grew up in the Adirondack areas and was recognized the problems with one there as far as deforestation and a number of things. But this is a hooked rug kind of piece. You know, Susie she's a radical threadhead. I think one of the best sewers I've ever known. A hook rug maker, a weaver, a dyer, and especially a quilt maker. Go ahead. This exhibition is up now at Stevenson University. These are fragments of fabrics that are made into a carpet. It is in the shape of her body, and these things sort of float across the floor. And she's made this one and the next one, which is a woven piece that also is in the contour of her body. And there's a whole series of these carpets that are spread out through the floor. Last thing I'm showing is a piece at the Albany International Airport. Albany International Airport is on the site of a Shaker community, and Susie researched Shaker Polly Collins, who did spirit drawings and then extracted and responded to her spirit drawings and making this floated kind of piece that floats above the in the concourse at the airport. And she's done a number of things that respond to various artists, whether it be Annie Albers or numbers of people numbers of artists or individuals who've done, mostly women artists who've done important things in the world. So thank you.
Thank you, Warren. I really love that you ask us to think of line and textiles three-dimensionally rather than two-dimensionally. And that textiles and their processes can be done using a range of non-traditional materials, as well as the intersectionality of craft with other fields such as medicine or engineering. And I would say in all of that work, for me, the range of scale and volume made the work very exciting, which I suspect is not only true for the viewers of your work, but it must be for your students when you are working with them. And one last thing, I'm a bit partial to Mi-Kyung Lee, since she is an amazing educator herself now and a collaborator of mine. So we are now moving on to our last presentation before the panel discussion. Thank you for the questions we have received so far. I have been adding them to my notes. Please remember to share them in the chat box so that I can pass them along to our awardees. Next, we have accepting the award on behalf of Craft in America, Carol Sauvion. Carol is the founder, executive producer, and director of the PBS documentary series Craft in America, which is part of a Los Angeles-based nonprofit organization with the mission to promote and advance original handcraft work. The documentary series is Emmy-nominated and Peabody Award-winning, while the nonprofit also maintains 2 comprehensive websites and the Craft in America Center. Craft in America provides outreach to 6 public schools in the Los Angeles Unified School District, production of education guides in conjunction with the premiere of each episode, production of short films to expand upon the materials presented in the PBS series, and they provide films and shorts to museums and craft organizations nationwide. To help advance knowledge of the handmade, Sauvion participates in conferences and screenings. She juries exhibitions and lectures on craft, and is currently on the board of the American Craft Council. In all of her spare time, she makes pots as an avocation. I would like to offer my congratulations to the entire team that helps to make Craft in America the significant program that it is, and to Carol. We are very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Leila. We just invited Carol to unmute herself. Carol, we can now hear you if you want to start.
Thank you so much, and I apologize. I want you to be careful not to interrupt other speeches. I want to thank Leila, and our special thanks go to the James Renwick Alliance for honoring the Craft in America project. I'm speaking with you today from Los Angeles, California. We at Craft in America are thrilled to be included with Sandra Sherman, Sid Carpenter, and Warren Selig, visionary artists and educators in the arts. The university is an important place for craft and one of the places we have focused on in our PBS series and beyond broadcast. The Craft in America project was founded in the early 2000s to bring increased awareness of the handmade to our modern world. We've produced 25 episodes of our series and broadcast them nationwide on PBS. We include all the communities within the craft movement, inviting the finest artists to participate. Mary Jackson, pictured here weaving one of her signature baskets with her daughter April and her granddaughter Imari, participated in Memory, the first episode of Craft in America, which premiered in 2007. The upcoming Storytellers and Democracy episodes will premiere nationwide on PBS December 11th. Storytellers highlights artists who use narrative to communicate their personal experiences and beliefs. Democracy documents the way craft intersects with our government. Craft represents the diversity of our nation. It is essential to the cultural, scientific, economic, and educational strength of our country. Here is a short trailer from the Democracy episode.
Craft and art are core to the democracy that we have here in the United States.
The Smithsonian Institution is the largest museum complex in the world, and it's a place where people come to learn about what it means to be an American.
I think that as a nation, we're still grappling with the legacy of race that started with the enslavement of Black people in this country. This museum is one of the places where we help people grapple with that.
We chose 21 women to help us understand what this exhibit was going to be about. Native women are quite used to doing this, working together in our communities. This is how we've survived.
To be able to have veterans in the height of their craftsmanship come into the Library of Congress to tell their story is democracy in action.
I'm here to explore new ideas.
We had been in a craft program for 127 years. We had never had a person of color in a leadership position. So for students to be able to see someone who looks like them at the highest level is really important.
My dad has conceived a memorial that will galvanize our country in a difficult time.
They told me this was the last national memorial on the mall. If every tribe go there and they do a ceremony, that's going to become a powerful place.
There will be a special digital release of Democracy on all PBS platforms this coming Monday, October 26th, making it available with PBS election programming. To access the digital release of Democracy, go to the PBS video app or pbs.org/craftinamerica. Education is an essential component of the Craft in America mission to promote and advance original handcrafted work. Many who watch our PBS series are newcomers to the craft world. Through our episodes, they're inspired to learn more. This is where our education efforts begin. Once the Craft in America website has premiered, viewers can visit our website, craftinamerica.org, to expand upon the information in the televised hour. Here we present full episodes, web clips, resources, artist bios, and educational materials. In accordance with PBS requirements, Craft in America produces education guides to accompany each episode of our series. Working with Dr. Marilyn Stewart, Professor Emerita of Kutztown University of Pennsylvania, we create standard-based guides that bring craft into the classroom. These lesson plans are intended to be used with Craft in America video segments and full episodes of our series. Through activities including hands-on learning, the guides help teachers and students discover craft's importance in our lives. And I think this is where our project differs a bit from the other honorees, because we really focus on the education for the grade school and high school level. And sometimes our films are used in colleges, but really our focus is LAUSD and grade school and high school. The Craft in America Center on West 3rd Street in Los Angeles is the public platform for our work. In a modest storefront, a quiet place on a busy street, the center is a small public museum with a permanent collection, a library, and a programmatic space that comes alive with activities. Here we organize exhibitions and produce publications. We host artist talks, Craft in Action community dialogues, the Reading Craft book group, book signings, hands-on workshops, demonstrations, and concerts. The Craft in America Center provides a platform in Los Angeles for educating the public on the work of the nation's finest craft-based artists. Please enjoy this short video about our center. For those who are not able to visit in person, exhibitions are digitized and presented on our website. Talks and virtual exhibition walkthroughs are filmed and archived online as resources for all to access. These virtual activities have become our focus during the pandemic, and we are reaching an international audience digitally. Our Craft in Schools program, launched with one LAUSD Unified High School in 2012, has grown to serve 6 schools on an ongoing basis, 2 elementary, 1 middle, and 3 high schools. Here we see Thurman Statham working with middle school students. Introducing children to the crafts at an early age is essential, as we see in this short video.
Who here has been here before? Anybody? We got 2, 3 people have been here before.
Here at the Craft in America Center, we have a program called Craft in Schools, where we work with public school students at underserved campuses, and we bring them to the center to show them our exhibitions where they get to see the artwork in person. For many students, it's the first time they've ever been in an art gallery or a museum setting, and When they're here, they're able to look, observe, and discuss what they see in a really informal and intimate setting. Our goal is to encourage their participation and their verbalization of their ideas and verbalizing what they are seeing through their eyes. Usually they're able to meet the artists when they come here and hear straight from the artists about the artwork that they're seeing, which is a very rare opportunity and can be very exciting for the students to get to meet for the first time a professional working artist. And then as the other portion of what we do through the program, that artist goes back to the schools and then teaches a hands-on workshop on campus with them based on that artist's practice.
Craft in schools is important for a lot of reasons, I think, and one of the main reasons is that the more you use your brain in different ways, the better you absorb academic knowledge.
But make it your treasure.
People who do crafts have their brain is more fluid and it grasps information better, and it's important for people to know that crafting and expression of art and culture and mood is important.
I think art's important in school because it's a way of expressing oneself. It's a way to learn about your environment. There's so much around you that relates to art without even thinking about it.
Every time I come and I bring a group of students here, it's just, I mean, the students really enjoy themselves. They get a chance to learn something that I'm not teaching in the classroom and to experience something different as well, a different type of art form. We've done printmaking, they've worked with glass, they've created flowers out of fabric to go on the wall for an installation piece. The center has allowed the students to have opportunities that they may not have had otherwise.
The core purposes of craft in schools are to introduce craft skills, share how craft shapes our world, and introduce the arts as a career goal. Many of the students in our program have little or no access to the arts. During the pandemic, we provided online activities for the arts in the new distance learning curriculum. Through visits to our center, students experience exhibitions and meet visiting artists. Let's watch one last short film with Consuelo Jimenez Underwood, whose Virgen de Guadalupe quilt is in the Renwick collection, speaking to LAUSD high school students about pursuing one's dreams, making life choices, and finding individual pathways.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome. Come on in. The water's fine. I'm going to try to tell you things that I think you should know and things that I wish I knew when I was your age. And I'll also tell you things I knew when I was your age. I'm number 11 of 12, and we would travel until we found a good farm and we'd pick. I don't have much time was the bottom thing. So when people are walking, I'm running. And if people are running, I'm flying. Because I got to get ahead. I'm at the bottom of the social economic status of this country. I got to catch up because I don't want to pick as a grown-up. I will pick until I'm 18 because after that, my mom and dad can't tell me, go pick. If I was going to do that plan, that means that when I was 18, if I wanted to do whatever I want, I had to stay out of juvenile hall and I had to at least get a high school education and then I could fly. So that's what I did. I thought about all that when I was 9. These are the true masterpieces of the world. young kids that have a vision of where they want to go and the clarity and the strength and the will to do it. Know thyself. Know who you are. That's the most important thing for an artist, is to know who you are. Know what makes you tick. Know what makes you mad. Know what makes you angry. Know what gets you a tummy ache. Know what exhausts you. And then on the other hand, know what makes you happy. Know what makes you want to fly. Know what makes you excited about your future. And every one of you is different, just like every one of those is different. I'm hoping you guys take the baton. As I go away, you guys take it on. That means you have to get to a college program, and you have to get your bachelor's, and you have to get into a graduate program. You want an MFA because you want to be the artist. You want to be a mighty fine artist. So how do you get into college? Well, what you're doing now, you take advantage of every opportunity of art that comes your way.
I'd like to end my presentation with pictures from our production and a few thoughts about craft. Making something by hand, at whatever level of skill or creativity, is life-changing. Making a program about craft is a daunting task. There are so many craft makers to include, so many types of handwork, so many levels of competency. Great skill is needed to make a great thing, whether that thing be a quilt, a teapot, a hand-woven textile, a basket, a tiara, or a monumental sculpture. Craft gives us many choices. We at Craft in America present them to our audience in our series and in our Beyond Broadcast programs. And always, the artists are the educators. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Carol. I have a few questions for you. What neighborhoods in LA do you work in?
We are in West Los Angeles. We are about 10 blocks west of the original farmers market on West 3rd Street.
And can you share a little bit about how Craft in America is documenting artists' experience during the COVID-19 crisis?
Yes, we have had to, I think the most interesting, important word being used nowadays is pivot. And we've had to pivot from having students come into our center and going into the classrooms to doing 3D walkthroughs, actually, of exhibitions and posting that online. And we have special programs now that we've shortened our education guides, which were usually used in the high school classroom and required maybe 5 or 6 sessions to complete one of the guides. Now we're doing single guides, single sessions, so they can, and things that can be done at home. So we are happy with how we've been able to rearrange, but we are looking forward to having the children and the students back in our center again.
I think perhaps what some audience members weren't aware of, I wasn't previously aware of the work Craft in America Center does with the school district. And I know how important that first visit to a gallery can be. And I'm thrilled to watch the new episode in the days ahead. So thank you for giving us a sneak peek about that.
Thank you for the opportunity.
With that, we conclude the 4 presentations. Please share a virtual round of applause for our distinguished educators as we transition over to our panel discussion and question and answer session. I'd like to remind presenters to unmute themselves when speaking. And also for the audience, please monitor, I am monitoring the chat for your questions and would love to include some of your questions among my own. So remember to also include your name and where you're joining from so that we can share them. So I'm going to direct one of my first questions to Warren. And these questions were put together after speaking with everyone because they were themes that came up and over again. So this first question is, if we consider the role of craft as a means to personal fulfillment or empowerment, how does this apply to your educational philosophy?
Actually, it is primary. I think it's the most important question that you asked there. And actually, you know, Consuelo said, know who you are. And I think that after a student learns basic skills in textiles where I teach, my biggest challenge is to somehow, this is on the undergraduate level too, where you're just there to taste the possibilities. But my biggest challenge there is to somehow have students gravitate towards something that is important in their life, and in fact, something that will sustain them for life, and I see that happen. In fact, watching the kind of revelation occur in a student is one of the most exciting things that can happen. And it doesn't happen maybe early on, and maybe not till the junior year, but at some point. For many of them, it happens, and for example, with the 5 artists I brought on the screen here, that happened to them. And in a way, in fact, oftentimes it's a magical moment. It was for me. I know when I suddenly discovered that this was an important area for me to be part of, that was one of the important moments in my life, and I expect to see that in students, and I worked hard towards that, if that makes any sense. One more thing that I have to say too, and Ellen Dissanayake wrote an amazing book, probably one of the most brilliant writers about craft, you know, I think in the last 50 years. And she talked about how we are biologically driven to make. And I think I see beginning students when they start working, when they start making things, you can see in their eyes, you can see in their energy that something is there that it's a life force, and it's an amazing thing, and something that I'm thrilled by in seeing when I'm teaching.
My response to that is absolutely. When they come in to my classes, I'm aware that there are some students that are more confident than others about what they're doing because maybe they've had some success as a high school student and they've gotten a lot of support and acclaim and reinforcement about doing it. And also, I'm very interested in that student who doesn't display that kind of confidence. I think that obviously the two students, the less confident, the more confident, there are different things that you're going to bring to them. But one of the important things is that they do have that recognition that now they're in a space where they are in charge. And that goes to my ideal, or at least what I said earlier about refraining from imposing too much of my own sensibilities upon them. And so I think that creating an environment where they gain confidence and begin to know themselves and to begin to trust what they do, I think that that's all important in reference to this question.
And also to never give up, because I think that I have had too many situations where a student where I wasn't sure what was going to be happening, suddenly after a year or two, they opened up and they emerged, and it was like a revelation to me to see them become what they became.
Yeah, because you can't teach to the talented ones.
No, right. No, exactly. Right.
You know, I think one of the things that Rudy Staffel said to me that has stuck with me all my life is that he reviewed my work and he looked at it and he said, "You have a problem." And I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "You have talent," which meant that it was going to be harder to break down that sense of, well, I can do this and I'm all that. But he wanted to take it down so that I could begin from the beginnings and to be open to different options and not rest on my laurels.
So this question is from the audience for all of the educators. What factors should prospective students look for in an educational program? And this was posed to us by Jerry Paulson in Alexandria, Virginia.
I guess I would say, you know, to look at the work of the students from that program, because that's going to tell you how open it is in terms of like what your own direction or development might be, and how sophisticated you can anticipate to, of an experience you can anticipate.
Really good.
I second that. It's always going to be about what the students have made, despite who the instructor is, whether this instructor is well known and a celebrated instructor, just what are the students making?
And sit in on a discussion when school is happening and when critiques are going on possibly, or just regular things are going on in the classroom studio.
There's a question for you, Warren. What is the book that you mentioned in your presentation? Would you mind sharing it again?
It's Ellen Dissanayake, and it's What is Art For? It was published years ago, but Ellen has been visiting artists at Haystack and a number of different places around the country. But she actually has a global sense of what art. She's not Western centric about her thinking about art. She really is open to all cultures and all ways, and concerned about why we have this desire to make things, and she's written several books. Another book is called
Homo Aestheticus.
Homo Aestheticus. In fact, I have some writing in that particular book.
Yeah, that's a great book. I assigned those two books to my students.
And she was Tyler years ago is where I first found out about her, when I was in Philadelphia at Philadelphia College of Art. She's brilliant.
For my next question, I'd like to start with Sid. What students are finding their way to craft education today, and what is it offering them?
Okay, so I thought about this question, and I think the question has broader implications, which I think create a more interesting conversation on the subject of craft educators and their students. So my response is to establish that education and craft goes both ways. It's an exchange between the students and the educator who represents the craft world. So I also wanted to offer up a distinction between craft and making and the craft world. What does that mean? So the craft world, and I distinguish it as craft with a capital C, is a community of professional and semi-professional more often than not, institutionally trained, including artists, craft educators, museums, commercial galleries, scholars, collectors, curators, art centers, and conferences. That's the community. That's that world in which we operate as craft artists. And these are all supported by publications, including a select number of magazines, and then there's an unending publication of books and websites and social media. Craftspeople making good work gain recognition within that world, and they gain some status and success, and through just the navigation of this environment. So that's the craft world, and we as educators bring that into the classroom in a certain way by virtue of having achieved a certain level of status in our work. And we're able to present, we're the teacher, they are the student. So I'm going to engage the question in two parts. The first being that I'm seeing more students of color from all over the world in my classes. And I'm especially happy to see so many African-American students in my classes, because generally African-American students are, by virtue of what their goal is, they want to be doctors, they want to be lawyers, and so often there's this avoidance, instructed maybe by their parents not to get involved or engaged in the arts. So there's that kind of limitation, that kind of obstacle. But I am seeing more and more students of color, including African-American students, who are coming into the classroom. So craft is, let's see, the second approach is to refrain from reframe the question entirely. And I'm not asking who is coming to our classes and what we offer them, but rather how is craft benefiting from the presence of the students? So I see that exchange happening. So craft is universal. It's practiced to some degree by all cultures. As craftspeople with a capital C, I make that distinction, we practice in concert with all of these makers, although in what we could be viewed as a kind of elite and selective community. There is this kind of hierarchy of craft. So an example is we were not very long ago that the Gee's Bend quilters were recognized for their contribution as preeminent masters of their craft, even though they had been producing these works right under the art world's nose for decades. The craft community at its most receptive and observant state realizes the necessity to view the creative landscape with a fully open lens. We're opening it up. We have opened it up. This is to ensure craft's ability to sustain itself as a vital component of our overall global visual culture. So ultimately, my answer to the question is that the crafts community is its own most important student. Craft is the receptacle, open to unfamiliar demographics, and geographies. And it's compelling us as educators to create learning environments that reflect and appeal to an ever-expanding spectrum of future makers and audiences. So I like to emphasize the exchange that goes on in the classroom, not what are we giving them, but what are they giving us?
It's a really great point. Thank you for sharing that.
I think if I would talk about who's drawn to craft education, I'm not talking about craft with the big C at that point, because I think that there's a large need or interest in making things in counterbalance to our increasingly digital world, which is all part of my answer to my question later, but it overlaps here. So I think that there are a lot of people just drawn to the empowerment available in actually being able to transform material to work in forms which are familiar to them from their original domestic function. I think there's a much broader audience just in terms of craft with a small c, making.
The jeweler Sharon Church and I had a conversation probably a decade ago, and just talking about the reason why students are attracted to craft, because they don't want to spend their life in front of that screen, period, right? So that's part of it. That can be elaborated upon, but that's the bottom line.
I'm sorry.
I was going to move on to another question, but please go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say that, you know, in a time where so much is viewed through a screen, or we are told what we want, told what to do, I think it's important for craft to step in as this antidote to that. Making is an antidote. Making something that reflects who you are. I think that whole ability to create, invent, produce is something that's going to be so, it's an imperative, I think, for us as a species even to maintain itself as some vitality and invention, because that's what survival on the planet is our ability to look at our environment and make something of it.
So I think this is interesting to transition to a question from the audience here from Diane Charnov. She wants to hear how some of you and your students have had to pivot and adjust and invent new modes of teaching and learning in our pandemic world.
For me, ironically, and I wouldn't have anticipated this, I'm not teaching this semester, but I taught in that second half of the spring semester when all this hit the fan and we had to suddenly create classes. I was teaching a potter's wheel class. How do you teach pottery via Zoom? And I was teaching a containers architecture class. And so one of the lifelines that I was able to grasp was using Zoom to bring artists to them. And we could go into their studios. And it was just very fast. It was fluid. The artists themselves were really happy to do it. They didn't have to get on a plane. They didn't have to be away from their families. So I was able to juice up my class at the second half via this medium, Zoom. So I wouldn't have thought it. Would I wanted to continue doing that? Not on a prolonged basis. But for that short last half of the semester, it really was something that I landed on. And I certainly will use it in the future to bring artists who maybe I wouldn't have access to, but I will use it in concert with actual in-class experiences.
Carol, you answered this question a little bit. Do Warren and Sondra have some feedback on this one?
I immediately also thought of last spring, because now in the fall we've had some more preparation. And the thing that I really found actually positive in the experience last spring was I was teaching jewelry, and I also teach 3D design, and so they're making. And so it was interesting that in that case, they really had to see how many resources they had just at home, just with like simple means, ways that, things that they take for granted as a means of making, of constructing, or of combining materials. So I actually, I thought that was interesting. I don't think that I would be able to get the students to do that if it wasn't necessary in that situation, because they're all eager about using, the equipment and, learning specialized techniques. But I thought it taught them something that they wouldn't have learned another way, and that hopefully contributes to the way they apply themselves subsequent to the pandemic.
I also taught online the second half of last of last semester, and it was a very difficult experience that I had, and the biggest problem was and you take for granted what it's like to be together and have a conversation, to look in one's eyes, to watch body language, all that sort of thing. The conversation that went on was good, but it was nothing like the kind of conversation that goes on when you gather together as a group. So I am supportive. What choice do we have? Of course, I support it. I support it, but basically, I can't wait to get back to the real world once again.
That point is something we talked about, and putting together this panel discussion. How do we have an engaging discussion among us without being in the same room together, with the visual cues that you have when you have a conversation? So thank you all for working on this together with me. So my next question I'm going to direct to Carol. Your work has enabled you to explore such a broad range of craft practices and how it is situated in different communities. Can you speak to your views on the evolution of craft education in your career, beginning with the environment from where you began, by comparison to where we are now?
Thank you, Leila. Yes, and I have a completely different experience from the students who've been lucky enough to work with the teachers who are in front of us, the educators who are in front of us today. I'm actually more or less of a self-taught potter, and that's how I started. And when I went to Hunter College, when Susan Peterson was teaching there, I was able to use the kilns and have her influence on me. But I do remember visiting the Haynos in Ojai, California. And when they asked about my education, I said I was self-taught. And she said, nobody is self-taught. And that is correct. I was actually shown first how to make pots on the wheel by Toshi Seeger. And she learned from Susan Peterson at Idlewild when Pete was singing there, so and teaching there. And so that for me, it was a process of just learning how to throw and then going from that to making functional ceramics, working in porcelain, and selling my work for about 10 years, and then finally saying, it's too difficult to pack up and do shows. I'd love to open a space where I could sell my work and the work of other artists. And like many people in the field, that eventually the business part of it, the gallery part of it, took over from my own work, which I just do now for my own pleasure. But that led to opening a gallery called Freehand, and we sell functional craft, and we're located in Los Angeles. We've been in business now for 40 years, which is exciting to have seen how the field has changed. So, and then that led me in 1996 to thinking about, why is craft seemingly under the radar? And I think you've all answered that because you've taken it to the arts. You've made it a part of your experience teaching. It's not all, because you've added your own individual intention and thoughts and creativity to that, which is much more on a different plane than, say, somebody who's working in a workshop situation or a culture-based craft or even a family-based craft. So you've elevated the crafts in a very important way. I decided in 1996 that, why was this under the radar? After 15 years of selling craft to a very varied clientele, I said, we need to put this on TV. We need a series about this. We need people to know, just as an entree, to understand what is available there. And so we started the project in 1996. The first series aired in 2007. It took 10 years of people saying, what is this about? Who knows about this? Who cares? And it turned out to be quite the opposite. Our first series won the Peabody Award, and we have aired nationwide since 2007 on PBS. Very humble, 2 hours a year, but they are the basis for all the education that we do and for going deeper into the craft world. We have featured several universities. We've been to Kansas City Art Institute. We've been to Berkeley. Oh gosh, lots of places. We filmed with artists, of course, like Joyce J. Scott, who went to MICA. So it seems like now it's just become more seamless. There aren't those sort of silos of, well, this is craft and this is art. It seems like it's self-expression, and that's, I think, what we've learned from the work we've done. And we hope to continue, and there's so much to say, as I said in my talk. There's just, it's endless, it's infinite. It's the television series that will never run out of material. So I'm thrilled to be involved. It's been a great journey.
You mentioned the position of craft and the hierarchies of art and design and how that's changed. And Sid mentioned earlier about diversity. And then of course there's technology that has changed. To end, we only have time for one more question. And I'd like to direct it to Sondra. And I think we'll end on a really, what I hope will be positive and forward-thinking note. What do you see as vital to the future of craft education, and what call to action do you have to share with this audience?
So I was really heartened to see the Craft in America, Craft in the Schools project. And I really feel like that's something that is lacking, that the teaching of craft, small c, within public education K through 12. I think that craft really, and making connects us. It connects us with ourselves. It connects us with our bodies. It connects us with each other and with our ancestors. And teaching 3D, I have people come in as freshmen and they get money in the schools for technology and they do not get money in the schools for hands-on art. And I can see that they don't know themselves in a certain way, in the way that they would through working hands-on with materials that that transform. And then the other thing is that someone else also mentioned something to this effect of how, like, oh, I think it was in the video, how, you know, students learn other things while they are learning craft and making, right? There's science. I'm always talking physics. I never had a physics class, you know. They're learning math, you know, I call it visual geometry. You know, there's like, so it's a way of, you know, different learners also, you know, having more access and maybe building more confidence in across areas of education. And I really feel like that's something that should be developed again in the public school system.
Something we used to say at the museum where I worked in Virginia, which served a 100-mile radius, it was deep in the mountains, was we educate through art and craft, because people sometimes, I think, are wary of art education, right? You educate through the arts.
One thing I think is really important to kind of understand now too is that there wasn't that many years ago where every household had a sewing room, every household had a wood shop in the basement. Now those places are full of electronic stuff. And basically, when I meet with students, oftentimes, especially in the beginning years, the revelation that they experience by making something for the first time in their life is overwhelming. I mean, it's one of the things that one of my favorite areas to teach is teaching beginning students, because of that, just to watch that revelation, watch their eyes, watch their bodies become physically engaged.
Thank you all so much. Thank you again. Congratulations to all of you. I've truly enjoyed serving as moderator this afternoon. I'd like to ask everyone to remember to visit craftnowphila.org to learn more about my organization. And I hope to see you at some of our upcoming programs that begin next week. And with that, I am going to turn the program back over to Michelle Manette and Jg Harrington to present the Distinguished Educator Awards.
Thanks. Now we're going to formally honor our distinguished craft educators. Usually we hand them plaques, but this year we've had them delivered. Still, we'd like to make the recognition official. I'll present the first two awards, and Michelle will take care of the second two awards. First, Sid Carpenter. Sid is a professor of studio art at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, where she's been teaching since 1991. As one student said of her, she takes the time to get to know her students well, their interests, their strengths, their weaknesses. She helps you to learn to see the world differently, not just make art. Congratulations, Sid Carpenter, on being a 2020 JRA Distinguished Educator.
Thank you so much. As I said earlier, this is a prayer, one that I will cherish. I'm right now in my studio, but I'm looking for a place to position my plaque. And when I go back to school, I'm going to make sure those kids see it on the shelf.
Great, thank you. Second is Warren Selig. Warren is a distinguished visiting professor at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia and has regularly been a visiting critic at the Rhode Island School of Design. In talking about him, students have said he gives great critiques, that he opened my eyes to the possibilities, fiber, and even that I wished I were taking this class again. Congratulations, Warren Selig, on being a 2020 JRA Distinguished Educator.
Thank you. I just want to say that it's a huge honor, and it's been such an important part of my life, and to get this award is just tops it all off. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Michelle?
Sandra Sherman. Sandra Sherman is Associate Professor of Art and Program Head in Jewelry and Metalwork at San Diego State University, where she's been teaching, leading, and inspiring since 2006. In the words of a recent student, she doesn't want to paint a picture for you. She doesn't want to give you the path. She doesn't lay out those bricks for you. Sondra wants to help you find your bricks and make your own path. Sandra Sherman, congratulations on being a 2020 JRA Distinguished Educator.
Thank you. I'm incredibly privileged to teach, and I'm very honored that the Renwick Alliance provides this recognition. And of course, it goes to the students, right? But I also really appreciate what the Renwick Alliance is doing in terms of supporting the crafts and craft education. I think it's, as I said, very important, and I'm happy to be part of it.
And Carol Sauvion and Craft in America. Craft in America is a nonprofit educational platform and project established in the remarkable year of 2004, 16 years ago. Its premier project is the Peabody Award-winning and Emmy-nominated Craft in America documentary series, carried on PBS, the premier public broadcast network of our country, and on its digital platforms. It has 25 episodes, and we are so lucky to have seen the preview of an episode that will drop digitally on Monday, called Democracy. From its LA home base, Craft in America Center deploys its resources throughout a vast video library, through exhibitions, artist talks, workshops, and window concerts, as we heard about today, all hosted at its West 3rd Street location near the Beverly Center. It publishes in-depth education guides, and it runs supplementary arts education programs that reach a whole host of students throughout the LA Unified School District from ages kindergarten through 12. For Carol, the founder of Craft in America, the executive producer of the series, and I would add, a national treasure, we award you as one of the 2020 JRA Distinguished Educators. Congratulations, Carol.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I have just a couple things to say. First of all, Michelle Manat came all the way out to California to visit us at our center, and I thought that was such an honor to have you take that time to get to know us a bit, so I so appreciate that. I want to say that I'm accepting this award for the many, many artists, filmmakers, editors, scholars, directors of the center, on and on and on. This is really not my award, it's an award that goes to many, many people, so we're very grateful. The last thing I want to say is I like the tile on the award. Thank you very much. Who made that tile?
We'll get you those details.
Thank you very much.
Follow up.
It's been an honor to be with all of you.
The Craft in America Center is an absolutely remarkable place, and I grew up in LA, so it opened my eyes to something I didn't know about. I'm going to take the prerogative of the former president to mention just 3 short things. One, ladies and gentlemen of our audience, we are still at 75 people. I think you've seen the importance and the value of our Educator Award because of what these educators are learning from one another. Nothing could make me more delighted than to hear that Sandra Sherman is learning about what Craft in America is doing in the LA Unified School District. So, boom, as we say these days. Number 2, I wanted to mention the book, Craft Capital, the remarkable book that was done under the direction of Leila Cartier and her board with a lead essay by Glenn Adamson. This is about craft as it comes to life and as it is carried forward and the traditions it honors in Philadelphia, one of the most important cities in the history of the United States. And third, I want you to notice, yes, that I had red and white and blue chosen specifically for this weekend, that we just put out our new Craft Quarterly, the JRA publication that many people who are on this Zoom contribute to in various forms. This is hot off the press. On it is the Freedom Quilt, which is included in the Democracy episode. Pretty darn amazing. And on the back, we have 2 buttons that urge you and all readers to vote. So ladies and gentlemen and friends and supporters and new friends and old friends and distinguished educators and board members, please vote. Please vote.
Yes. Already did it.
All right.
Yay.
Done deal.
Over to you, JG.
Thank you. So today we're honoring our distinguished craft educators, but we also recently announced our Chrysalis Award for Emerging Artists. It went to ceramics artist Kate Roberts. Congratulations, Kate. Don't forget our Carnival of Craft tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Tickets are still available on the Renwick Alliance site. That's jra.org. We were asked about this. The symposium will be available on our site after the end of Craft Weekend. And if you like the symposium, please consider joining the Renwick Alliance or making a contribution to support this and other programs. You can also do both of those things at jra.org. Thanks to our distinguished educators, to Leila, and to everyone who joined us this afternoon. I hope we'll see you all tonight.